the Matrix IT page there. So yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. So obviously automation is the subject of the discussion today. The sort of bits that I've been asked to look through is sort of going around the more of a case of as a services manager, how we leverage automation in everything we do from the engineering point of view and from statistics and KPIs to ensure that as a company and supporting our customers, we're making sure that automation is used in the right way rather than using it for the sake of automation's sake. So I've been doing automations, looking at automation and specializing in that kind of area for the best part of about 4 or 5 years now. Having been recently moved to Matrix about 1.5 years ago, they took me on to kind of head up that side of things for the company. So one of the kind of, before I get into showing some of the bits and pieces that we do, and I can't show you too much, unfortunately, because of data protection, but I can show you some of the kind of core ideas and behind it all. It's important to note that automation for automation's sake is quite a common thing that people fall, I think the word, but yeah, they kind of fall foul of when doing kind of automation and when looking at it. For example, some people will look to automate every aspect of the working kind of environment, which can often have negative impacts because we're then taking the human element out of it, and in that way it could lead to issues further down the line, whether it be customer service based or kind of performance based, or even with your own employees, and feeling kind of not part of the team. We also make sure that as part of automation that we're making sure that when leveraging automation in the right way, we still have everything to kind of adhere to from an ISO standpoint. So we're ISO 9001, so quality management system, and we use that very, very well hand in hand with automation to make sure that we identify areas that can be improved via automation rather than, I think this would be cool with automation. So yeah, that kind of gives you, that's the kind of a brief idea of what I do at the company. Some of the things that we were doing more specifically recently was with the kind of lockdown that happened over 1 year ago now. We were looking at how we can implement automation in a way that ensures that our customers and our SLAs on our own tickets were not impacted by the fact that customers were kind of closing up shop. You know, a lot of companies that we look after were furloughing staff, as I'm sure a lot of other companies did have. They were furloughing staff or closing down offices for periods of time. So a lot of those kind of tickets that come in prior to that were asking people to look at things, those users weren't available, and not every single customer is going to tell their IT provider, especially if they're an MSP like ourselves, they're not going to send an email out or get in touch to say we've done this, this, and this with these many users. So it can be quite, we knew that it was going to be busy, and we knew that it could bear a bit of a frustration for us. So one of the things that we love, because we're a Microsoft house, is Power Automate, which is essentially a platform to automate anything within the kind of 365 environment, the Microsoft stack. But it also goes a bit further as well with kind of plugins and add-ins and API calls and stuff. So it does quite advanced, but the core of it is around automating cloud-based function within Microsoft. So the kind of core stuff there that it's using is Outlook, SharePoint, forms, and timed approvals and things like that. So they're adding things all the time. So we've got quite a few in here. As you can see, some of them are disabled now as we don't need to use them all the time. But we have quite a few things that kind of come in and then we look at. So one of the things that we created way back when was the Covert Tickets. This is just, it gives you a bit of an idea of the sort of things you can achieve within Power Automate. It used to be called Flow, but they've now kind of changed it to be Power Automate as a product, and then each one of these items is a flow, which makes it a bit easier when trying to describe to people. to use it. So these Covert Tickets one, I'll take you through very briefly through the what's going on. So this is a really simple step that we've got in here, and this will be kind of ideal for anyone that's interested in kind of automating sort of ticket reopening, or if although we're using it for COVID, or we did start using it for the COVID lockdown, we're actually going to start using this going forward for kind of long-standing tickets that maybe a customer's, a user maybe goes on maternity leave, but we want the ticket to be there because if we know that they have an issue, but we don't want to keep that ticket open and just sat on the service desk, because although we could pause the SLA on it, it still affects our stats on how old that ticket is, whether it's in an age state, and it also then looks bad that we've just got a ticket open for a long time. And when we do our customer reports, they will be on that report every single time, that one ticket that we're keeping open. So the way that we're utilizing it is we're just having a recurrence ticket on this instance. We're having just something that happens every day. It starts, if we look at the advanced options, we're just running it at sort of 4 in the morning. Doesn't really matter when, particularly, as long as it's kind of each day and outside of the core hours, so it's not so it's there ready for when people start the day in the morning. And normally with these sort of things, if you want them to be there before the end of the day, I would advise to not maybe stack things up at 8 o'clock or 10 to 8 or quarter to 8, because it's a lot of things that are going to be happening. And with anything, especially in automation as well, things fail. So this gives you a bit of time for stacking things over 4 or 5 hours in the morning to kind of run and process. And if you're using an API, which you may do for your PSA, your ticketing system, then what you'll find is that API calls, they might have a limit on how many can be called if you're on premise or if you're a cloud partner or whatever you're doing. So doing that and spacing out is always a good thing to do. So this recurrence every day then goes on to create its next step, which is to get items. So we have a team site in SharePoint, and then we have a list within there, which we create called Covert Tickets. So it's really simple. It's always doing it first. It's just getting that list in SharePoint. And that SharePoint list, unfortunately, I can't show you because of data protection, but it's essentially just a simple list of kind of ticket number, information about the ticket, and a date when it needs to reopen. So we would close the ticket, and then we would put the date that we anticipated needing reopen. So it might be 3 months from now, 4 months from now, if I'm on maternity leave or something like that, maybe 6 months, or it might be something that we go, do you know what, we're going to close it, but we're going to check back in a couple of months to reopen it, because we haven't seen the issue for a while, but we know it happens every time there's a Windows 10 feature release, which are now periodically twice a year. So it kind of, it depends on what you want to do, but setting the date appropriately. Then after that, we have this bit, which is the more complicated aspect of the flow. So these parts are just a nice simple, when does it happen, and then getting the information. And then we have to create these kind of compositions and conditions within the information that then gives us what's going to happen. For this one, for example, we're getting the value of the item, and then we're formatting. We're doing some clever composition, essentially, to kind of look at the open date and then formatting it to a particular output. Now, this condition here is essentially saying this information here, if it equals the current date in the formatted situation, if yes, follow these steps. If not, leave it alone. So it's always doing nice and simple. If it's looking for the information, we're doing some API calls with ConnectWise, that's who we use, to get some information, get all the field information, then get the ticket information from that API call. Then we're getting some ticket notes, putting the ticket notes into a JSON, and then finally, for each one of them, we're creating a new ticket. So we're essentially, rather than reopening the ticket, which then affects SLAs, which you can do within ConnectWise, and I think you can set a minimum or a maximum time they can be open for. So some people have it for sort of 30 days or 60 days. Some people only have it for sort of 2 weeks. We were doing it the other way around, where we would say this ticket has been closed and we want to reopen it on this date, but in fact what we're actually doing is we're reopening a brand new ticket with its own set of SLAs so that we can monitor it closely. It creates a new ticket with all the previous information in and a reference to that old ticket so that our engineers can just click in, have a look and find out the information. And then once it's done at the end, we then have a really simple kind of SharePoint stuff where we say it's been completed. We look at the information, the ID of the list item, the ticket number, and the reopen date, and then we just update it to say it's completed. And it never then runs again. Part of this is looking if it's completed, it will no longer be in the list from the step up above. So it's essentially just using flow in a way that's going to match how you want it to do it. So there's, that's just one example of what we've been doing essentially, is to try and get things working. And we've got simple ideas from just things like a major incidents email, which is a more recent one. So we have a channel within our teams, as I'm sure most companies are now kind of moving. If you're in the Microsoft stack and you're not using Teams, I'll just put this out there now, you need to be, not just simply from automation, but for just a collaboration tool, from a conversation tool, meetings and stuff like that, especially when you're this remote workforce. Teams is definitely the go-to if you're already in the Microsoft stack. If you're outside of it, then obviously weigh up your options. I'm not going to try and sell anyone Teams, but it's certainly the one to use if you're already paying for 365 Business or Business Premium. So this one's nice and simple, and these will be really, really easy ones to kind of implement. And they do have a few templates on the side as well here, that you can create ones and then bring them in from templates. But this one is just simply saying, look, we've got a team called company and then a channel called major instance. So when we get an issue, that's what we classify as a P1 or P2. So a customer's IT infrastructure is critically hit, a disaster recovery scenario potentially, or they've got no internet access, that sort of thing. Well, things that are going to stop them doing core work. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel from kind of the impact urgency ITIL framework, but that's what we're doing. We then take the condition and we look for a message that's in there that's equaling high. So nice and simple. If the message is set to high, it will kick this off. If it's not set to high and someone's posted it in there, then it's not going to do this flow. So once we've done that, we then just have a nice simple information here, which is going to send. We've got a nice shared mailbox set up called flow@mtxit.com. And that's set up ready to go. And it sends an email to major incidents, which is a distribution group within our Exchange Online. And it includes here nice simple connections. So it gives us the major incident and then the subject, which will be whatever the company and the priority. And then it will have the details regarding the major incident, and it will take the team's message body content and paste it in. Now it feels obviously like we're re-pointing information here, but this is mainly so that our people that aren't necessarily checking Teams all day have the information. Our directors potentially will, sometimes and customers will call them directly and say what's going on with my issue. And if they haven't checked Teams or they haven't seen it, this just ensures that they've got an email with the core information in it as well. So it's really, really just building upon simple information that you would do in the best way to kind of get started with the kind of automation I've found for customers. And I do a lot of consultancy for Matrix on automation as well for other businesses, and it's always the same information. Look at your tasks, start with a department or start with a person and look at the tasks that they do in a day and find the ones that they do the most. Look at the ones they're repeating again and again and again. And for this one, this major incident email was a really, really simple one for me to identify within our own company. Every time we had a major incident, it would be posted in Teams, and every time in Teams, someone would then email the directors to say, we've had a major incident, and it would just be copy, paste, copy, paste. Now, although it doesn't seem like much, pressing new in Outlook and typing in the information, but you have to add in the human element of getting it wrong. Occasionally, someone's going to forget to do it. Occasionally, someone's going to type something wrong or type an email address wrong, or the information in there may not have copied across properly, or they copied the wrong thing. It happens. People are prone to mistakes, and then there's no problem with that. But if we're doing by identifying that and that task and how simple that is to move into an automation platform like Power Automate, then we can easily get rid of that kind of ache of getting someone to do it. And we also then have it from, if you look at it from a management point of view, you then have to have a manager above them making sure that someone is doing it, checking that it has been done. And so it's not just a case of you've got one person who needs to do it and it takes a couple of minutes out of their day. If that happens 10 times in a day, which God forbid it shouldn't, then that's 20 minutes. And then you've got, each time you've got another 2 minutes for the the manager or whoever's their superior above them doing the check to make sure it's been done. Another minute or two, it starts adding up, and then before you know it, you could be in a day you've taken out an hour of time away from being productive. So it falls into those categories, and it's all about finding those simple fixes that happen a lot. You'll see that a lot in here. We've got a few that are disabled. Those ones that are disabled will be because we thought we needed them and we don't. We might have opened them up to say, created them to think, well, this is going to happen a lot. Let's get an automations thing in the bag now. And then what's actually happened is it's barely been used. And so I've disabled it to go back to the team to say, you requested this automation. Guess what? It's been used once in a year. And it then falls to the point of you have to weigh out which is better. Is it better to automate it? Is it better to actually have that automation, even if it's used very small amount, or is it better to have the human element of someone checking it and looking at it and double checking? Because a lot of this, although you can create conditions within Power Automate to say, is this information matching this? It's not human and it's not AI. There is more AI stuff deeper in here, but at the moment it is very logic based. It will look for information that you tell it, and you can condition it to say yes, no, or ifs and switches and controls. But ultimately, it's not going to stop an experienced user looking over something and sort of going, that's what I'm finding. I don't know whether that's, obviously you've only got sort of 20 minutes there, whether it's a good time to stop there for asking if anyone's got any questions about Power Automate and automation and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's great, Elliot. Thank you for that. And certainly it does give a bird's eye view of actually how you've approached that using Power Automate, which is good. I think we've got a couple of questions that come through. We'll get on to it. I think I'm really interested in how, as an organization, you're seeing the change in skills requirement for that, because you showed us some of the coding that goes into it, and I've been speaking to some larger, maybe large MSP organizations, big corporate organizations, and they've got a whole team of coders that will pick this stuff up. They'll fiddle with it. They'll spend an awful lot of time waiting for something like UiPath to be available so they can use it to do it. And then, I don't know, Microsoft throws something that works and makes a change. And then they've got to go all through that, through the stuff that they've got to change and then put it back out in the state. And one of the questions, so it's what they've found is they're looking for something else, something more intuitive, because it's very costly and it's just not as efficient as it could be. And this comes back to, Tom actually has asked another question. Thank you, Tom, about organizations having to, change. Change is a thing that we're dealing with all the time these days. Change is totally different to what it was maybe, 5 minutes ago. Yeah. So
yeah,
when you keep making these sort of new innovations, you put in some change stuff in there, or you put in some automation stuff in there. How do you deal with change? How do you deal with actually going back through a host of stuff to change it, to make amendments? How do you do all that?
It's difficult. A lot of the times it will be, you need to make sure you're documenting it correctly. I suppose that's another, that kind of falls into a whole other category. So we use something called IT glue for documentation, and for each automation flow that I'm creating or process, and we have that documented separately, and that has a attached process, a manual process with the attached automation that's running it. So we can identify very quickly which ones have been automated, which ones, when they were last updated and stuff, because it will have stamps on that. Now, it all kind of really, for us, it's going to depend on the size of the company and the environment, but for us, it falls down to that 9001 ISO. It's a horrible thing to implement, very, very messy, but once you do have it in place, it enforces you to check these things quite regularly because they have internal audits that you should be doing as part of ISO. And that then if you've got a document or a process from an ISO standpoint that matches the automation, then you will mention it in there. You'll say, you know, step 20 or whatever of your ISO document will say runs flow name, etc., or whatever ones in Power Automate. So when you do those internal audits, that's the time that you go, hold on, if I'm checking this process against someone doing this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and actually it didn't work out quite right, or there was something not right here, it would then be a case of going, well, let's have a look at the automation step. Right, that needs to be changed. It's now this, this, and this. I mean, that's the kind of more complex. I mean, there is even just simple things as alerting. If I just quickly go into this approval, you do have these runs that show you succeeds and hopefully not any fails. But you can get that in there, and there's also some analytics as well to show you other information. So you can, you know, if a company is big enough, I would say that over the next 5 years or so, we're going to see people start to hire more for automation. I think we'll see people hiring whether it's an automation manager or an automation expert within the company.
Yeah.
I think smaller companies will start to bring it under that umbrella. So I'm the service desk manager and the automation manager for Matrix, because we're not, you know, 150 plus people. We're much smaller. So you'll find that I think with a lot of companies and a lot of trends I'm seeing out there is that people are hiring specifically for automation. But that doesn't necessarily mean coders as well. It just means people that have their heads on straight for automation bits and pieces, because the coding side of it, a lot of times largely done for you, you know, whether it be Power Automate and using flows, or whether that be something like Zapier, or even things as if this, then that, the IFTTT. So you've got a few different options out there. But I think the main aspect of it is whoever creates them will need to either create their own system for checking them, or they'll need to use something like ISO.
Yeah, so I mean, as with everything else we do in IT, I suppose, isn't it? It's that rigor and governance around it to make sure that it's in place, which is really interesting. I mean, it's not a massive shift away from how we think about other stuff that we do, you know, in a service environment like that. And if we are pushing down the route of, well, you know, the tools are doing it, you're right, drag and drop, low code, no code, all that wonderful stuff. Is it more about a change in culture? Is it more about the way that people think about service, rather than, you know, so encouraging the change in the way people think and approach service to automate and optimize? Is that a bigger challenge maybe than actually automating itself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the actual automation side of it, although it can have its you know, its issues, or it's kind of it will test you at times with certain things, and you know, and as we all know, not every system will speak to the other system in the way that you want it to. So there'll be information that you kind of have to kind of make it more malleable and make it using Automate to kind of find the other information and speak on friendly terms. You know, I'm sure I don't need to teach anyone this, but Microsoft doesn't always play well with other people that create IT bits and pieces. So you do have that as a smaller kind of issue, but I find that the bigger issue, and especially when I do the consultancy, is people are more like, well, why do we need this? And it's then having the conversation, and I caught a little bit of the last person who was speaking before me, and I think they were saying a very similar thing, is it's not necessarily a case of trying to go, we're trying to get rid of anyone's job, or we're trying to stop people from doing the work. It's what we're trying to do is look at the things that don't make your work valuable. So if I was going to a company and I went and spoke to the finance team, for example, 9 times out of 10 they will be doing an invoice run on the end of a month. They'll be doing an invoice run, and they'll be there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night doing the invoice run. It'll be a stressful time for everyone, because 9 times out of 10 it's not the actual invoice running that is the difficult part, but it's collecting all the information beforehand and doing all the checks. Now, that for me is an automation hotspot, because they're not valuable doing the same thing again and again. They're not valuable just going through a system and tick, tick, tick and moving on. That's not valuable work. Valuable work is looking at the invoices after they've been sent and checking, you know, the customers are happy, following up with the customers, making sure that, you know, everything's been paid. That's more valuable to me than just ticking boxes and going down checklists and pressing buttons. it's those tasks that we look to automate, and it is a culture thing. People are very quick to kind of go, well, hold on, that's 90% of my job, but that doesn't necessarily mean it should be 90% of the job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right. I think that's what we're seeing as well, is the way that organizations are approaching, looking at this stuff. And we've seen some really great examples over the last couple of years where KPIs have been put in place as either a whole service to do things like, push 50% of incoming interactions into automation, right? Which is incredible. And even individual, people individually being rewarded and recognized for thinking differently and enabling automation. And I agree. I certainly think it's assistive, and if you think about how we use tools in our everyday life, it's the same thing. It's the same thing when we do anything. The tools are there to help. And one of the really good example that I use, I do an awful lot of reading and quality checking. Well, it takes time, and something like Grammarly, yeah, that's assistive. It assists me to get through stuff as well as I can as a human, if not better, actually, to be honest. And it gets me there quicker, and I can spend my time more productively on other stuff. And I think we find that everywhere. I think it is absolutely a shift in the way that we think about service. And I think sorry to bang on, but I think if we look at the way that ITIL 4 is actually encouraging that as well, it is about different stuff. It's about encouraging a different way to approach the very fabric of what we do to create service. Anyway, I could get on the soapbox, right? I could get on the soapbox for at least another 20 minutes, Elliot, but I'm not. We've got lunch, right? Thank you very much. It's really interesting to see that.